Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at riding from the inside out. Actually, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out, which is the topic for today.
Oh,
Oh, I skipped another part. Whoops.
you don't have to introduce us anymore, do you?
I don't know. Okay. I'm Kirsten. She's Deb. Here we go. Okay. I guess I'm on such a routine. I just like it's the introduction part instead of music. And now I'm all discombobulated, but that's okay. So,
Regroup.
regroup. So the topic today is conversations with our horses.
Mm.
And that's what sort of made my mind slam the brakes on when I realized I didn't say looking at horses and riding from the inside out, because to have a conversation with our horse is definitely where we start connecting inside to inside. And
Mm.
I think
Mm.
we think of
I like that.
conversations with our horses as the sort of gesture of our aides, mostly telling our horse what to do a lot, and not really either taking the time to listen or connecting a conversation, having a conversation on a much more subtle level than leg aids, rein aids, seat aids, all those things that we think of as the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like woo-woo land for me.
It feels like woo-woo
It
land.
does.
Yeah.
But I seek it. I mean, I really do. I really do seek it because I think I've talked before about when there's some sort of energetic unknowing until you make contact, a very light kinesthetic contact, then there's some level of knowledge being shared.
You're
Does
talking
that
about when you do hands-on people
Yeah,
in
when you put
Alexander
hands
work.
on, yeah.
Hmm.
Or when I was a massage therapist, there's this unknowing in about the person until you actually put hands on it, and you don't even have to be doing anything. You just put hands on and receive information
Mm.
to
And
get
so
knowledge.
right before the physical touch, person to person, you're saying that there's like an unknowing until the
Yeah,
physical contact.
it's almost like friction or noise because you're trying to interpret something that's not there. You're trying to get ahead of the game, but you really can't until you put the hands on and then you go, "Oh, okay. Now I understand."
And see, I find that so interesting that you say that, because that little space before the physical touch that you're
Mhm.
referring to, and again, we're talking invisible forces of motion. It's not actually woo-woo. It's
No.
measurable. It's tangible.
Mhm.
It's something we can sense even through our sense of touch, even if we can't see it or if we can't easily explain it. And so that little space that you're talking about before physical touch is exactly the area where horses seem to read our thoughts,
Mm.
right? Or they actually feel us, like what you're describing, getting that information through the sense of touch that you don't
Mm.
receive until you're physically hands-on or
Right.
touching. With horses, and this goes back to that Umwelt paper that we reviewed, research paper, that their sense of touch, especially around their barrel, the heart girth, the middle of the horse, their level of skin sensitivity is higher than the human fingertip.
Mm.
So it's like if you pause in that space before the physical touch, you feel a light connection just before the physical touch. And that's what you're describing as sort of like a static or
There's a lot of energy going through that. It's like a tunnel, of energy, which may sound weird, but
No,
Yeah.
it can sound woo-woo, and I think this is where the myth of horse whispering kind of
Uh,
takes hold. I think this is where, people believe in magical stuff with horses and how horses help people, but it really isn't it's cool like magic,
it
but
is. It's
but
really cool.
it's not like unexplainable. Do you know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah. And I think sometimes, a lot of times, we as the human don't favor that or even look for it.
Well, to us, it's extremely subtle.
Yeah.
But like I'll say to clients all the time, if you think of that energy, right, as a frequency or a vibration,
Hmm.
or a measurable tone, right? Just like we have muscle tone, energy can have tone, frequency, vibration. And that's what we're really sensing. But for us, it feels so incredibly subtle. And to the horse, it's loud and clear.
Right.
Loud and clear. Like I'll say to people, that actually is the conversational tone of horses. Like you and I having this conversation, we're not whispering or yelling, right? We're just
Right.
having a conversational tone coming into our words, right? So, like
Yes.
the spacing between the words is the frequency, and the tone of voice is the tone, which is actually muscle use through our throat. So, if we change that conversation from verbal to nonverbal, that little space that you're talking about
Hmm.
is where we can gather and send information before physical touch.
Yeah.
We start to get a sense of the vibration, the tone, and the frequency just before the physical touch. And for us, that just before the physical touch space can be massive for a horse. It
Right.
could be measured in feet rather than inches or centimeters. It could be measured in feet or meters for horses because
I see it. I see it out in my pasture between my in the herd. The
Mhm.
dominant mare has this huge bubble, and it's very clear to the other horses
Yeah.
what that bubble is. It's like, don't go there, don't cross that line.
No, and one of the funniest things I ever saw that sort of illustrates this point so clearly is I put my little mare in with a new mare that had come in training. And as mares do, lots of squealing, kicking, and ear pinning and deciding who's in charge the first 3 days. But they did it literally 100 feet apart. Like all of this bluster and all of this posturing was done without ever coming within 50 feet of each other.
No blows were landed.
Right. And so it was hilarious because my little mare would pin her ears and ball herself up and launch on the attack. So she would go galloping towards the other horse. And then she kind of hit this like 50, 75-foot distance. And the other mare would turn around, aim her butt, and kick at the air with her ears pinned. And so like 50 feet away, my mare would just careen off path and sort of go, never mind. And all of this, excuse me, over the course of 3 days, one mare would pin her ears, turn her butt, and kick. The other mare would pin her ears and charge, but they never came within 50 feet of each other. And
I
most of it was like 100 feet apart, all this energy and posturing. And then after 3 days, they were literally side by side, physically within 6 feet of each other, grazing.
Wow.
And I just found that fascinating because it really illustrates how far away horses can communicate and sense that energy. And again,
Yeah.
going back to the Umwelt paper, we assume all of that was done visibly or visually.
Mhm.
but their eyesight's not that good, right? So when they're literally taking aim at each other, it's energy, it's the sense of touch more than it's visual.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
why when a horse sort of flies a kick out, they hit what they're aiming at or they don't.
Or they don't. Exactly. You're either on the mark, they're always on the mark. People don't
Yep.
realize, oh, that was a near miss. It's like, no, that was just a warning.
That was a warning shot. Yeah. That was
If they're
not
gonna
a,
nail you, they're gonna nail you.
yes.
There's no, and another thing, people, it amazes me when I hear somebody say, "Oh, my horse is hard to catch." But they're not, when they're going out to catch them, they're not thinking about, well, what am I exuding energetically
Right.
at that time? Am I open and welcoming, or am I like, oh my gosh, look at the time, I've got to get going and I'm in a hurry. And the horse reads that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Horses become hard to catch for only two reasons. One, they have great memories and they remember every time they're caught. They don't like what happens after they're caught.
Mm,
Or they don't like what you're bringing to the table right now.
exactly.
So it's either that it's in the moment or they remember that after they get caught, things are no bueno, right? So
Yeah.
they just get better and better at avoiding being caught because they don't like what happens after they get caught,
Right.
right? Or you come in with all this energetic baggage.
Hmm.
And for us, we're not saying anything, we're not doing anything. So, from the human perspective, what's your problem?
Yeah.
Right? And
That's our thinking gets
that's our
us in
thinking.
trouble.
But from the horse's perspective, we're like broadcasting all either anxiety or attention or anger or not trying to connect. We might be broadcasting things that we're not aware of just by what we're thinking or feeling that might have nothing to do with the horse. We're just bringing it in with us.
Right.
And the horse just looks at us and goes, ooh, no, thank you. I'm good. I'll just kind of stay out here where things are quieter
Right.
because we don't realize that distance, like between the two mares, they're hearing us long before we're
Hmm.
ever making a tone that comes through our mouth or making a gesture, physically touching or asking them to do something. Like that's the
Right.
last piece of the conversation where horses are typically just checking to see if it's raining. Horses are typically having a low key conversation at much how do I want to say calmer or lower frequencies
Hmm.
that feel
Hmm.
almost so subtle to us that we don't think they're there. And I
That's,
think
I
that's what
think
you were
that's,
describing
yeah.
with that moment before you put a hand on a person.
Hmm.
We describe it kind of as friction or something we can't quite put
Hmm.
our finger on.
I call it the rub.
Hmm.
It's just like, I don't, the not knowing energy, you know. And I
But
think, yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
And I think our best riders, when we see them ride, it looks like they're doing nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's that subtle conversation that they have found with that horse, and we don't see anything, but we're very attracted to it because we look at that and go, "Oh, that's gorgeous. That's elegant."
effortless.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think people don't realize that we have something called an ideomotor skill, which is, if we think emotion, say if I think I'm going to stand up right now, it's already set into action.
Ooh, I felt that. Yep.
Yeah, do you
Yeah.
feel that? And
I
we
did. Yes. I could
yeah.
feel my body sort of.
Y-
change on a very
And
subtle level.
yes, and we don't key into that, but as we should, but the horses do.
Yeah.
So I try to get people to think trot or think from halt to walk. And it's amazing to me how it just happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even done that a lot of times when I'm working with riders. We'll do these simulations where one person is the horse and the other person is the rider. And the rider just places lightly hands on the horse's quote unquote shoulders.
Hmm.
So I have one person stand behind another. So the horse is in front, the rider's behind, and they're connected with just hands resting on the shoulders. And we'll play with that idea without any speaking at all, right? The instruction for the rider secretly is to just think, I want to walk forward, and see if our horse simulator, as another person, can pick that up.
Hmm.
And most people pick that up.
Yeah.
And it starts to feel like magic. Like I'll do it, I'll demonstrate it with somebody, and I think forward, I feel that sort of subtle change through my body. And people will respond by suddenly walking forward without me actually physically pushing with my hands. You know,
Right.
it's like through my hands, they feel my energy in that connection, but I'm not pushing them forward with my hand. And so then I'll decide, I think I want to stop. And without pulling backwards on the person's shoulders, they just stop with me. And I'll
Right.
ask them, how did you know to do that?
Hmm.
And people don't know how they knew,
Right.
but they knew to do it. They did it. That connection was there, but they're like, how did I know how to do that? Because you didn't verbally tell me and you didn't push me or pull me.
There's
So
a certain level of intelligence transfer. It's kind of like you're speaking about the Alexander technique of what I do. It's that intelligence transfer of information. And we really need to bring that back into our relationships, human and animal, um, because that's really where the conversation is,
yeah,
to me.
absolutely.
Um,
And
yeah,
when we talk about sort of having conversations with our horse, I go, I think sometimes I'm more of an interpreter than a trainer. I go, I'm fluent in the nonverbal language of horses. And so I'm helping people learn that language because it's a very distinct language, just
it
like
is.
English or French or Spanish. It's every change of force, shift of energy that may come just from how we're thinking about things, is a whole series of words from the horse's
Mhm.
perspective. And so getting people to learn to speak horse first is what really opens up that dialogue between a horse and rider that you're describing as the invisible, magical elegance of really good riders.
Yeah, yeah. We've become way too visual, thinking we need to see what's happening instead
Yeah.
of feeling what's happening. There's a article called The Lost Sixth Sense. It's not published anymore, but it goes into how with all of the computers and phones and things we have these days, we are losing that kinesthetic capability. We're kind of shutting it off, and
Yeah.
thinking we need to see what's happening instead of feeling what's happening.
Yeah. But it
Yeah.
doesn't take much to flip it back on.
No, it doesn't.
And
I,
I think it really blows people's minds. Like, I think I wrote about this in my newsletter last month, and we've talked about it in our group, but a super simple exercise, like just what I would call actually hand walking, with a halter and a lead rope and maybe a short riding whip, I'll put a person next to the horse's shoulder. So I call it like shoulder to shoulder. So we're standing parallel to our horse, but behind the head. And we use the halter and lead rope just like a rein and a bridle. So we don't lead the horse forward. That's why we need a whip to tap the hindquarters, and we request that our horse moves forward. But then once our horse is in motion, our job is to follow and synchronize perfectly with
Mhm.
whatever motion our horse throws at us. So we have to maintain the same distance parallel to the shoulder. But the really hard part is adjusting our speed to match the exact frequency of the horse's movement.
Mhm.
And that really wakes up people's kinesthetic sense. It's like all of a sudden, because if you try to look with your eyes, you're always late. You can't do it.
Mhm.
But eventually, when you start to feel it, or I'll even have people sort of rest the back of their hand on the horse's shoulder so that they're feeling it through physical contact. And just learning to move where the horse moves, left, right, or at whatever speed, sort of front to back, adjusting our speed at the same moment, it puts us into that space we're talking about, that
Mhm.
that little magical space before the touch. So sometimes we need the physical touch of our hand touching the shoulder at first to kind of get the hang of it. But then our arm gets tired and everybody wants to drop their arm. So they're like, so then we have to feel it within a space of anywhere from a foot to 3 feet.
Mhm.
But we can maintain this absolute synchronization, learning to follow the horse's movement rather than always directing it. And what's so cool is the horse will first test us. Like they'll go to the gate, they'll go to the corner, they'll trot, they stop, they turn left, they turn right. And if we can really manage to synchronize perfectly as the follower, every single horse suddenly starts to give the person an ear,
Mhm.
starts to relax, starts to open to the conversation. And
And I think
it's
we're much better riders when we do that. I mean,
infinitely,
our
infinitely
timing
better
our
riders.
timing is better. I think if we tuned in, the more we tune into that, we can feel what happens before what happens. We can feel the build up before the buck or
Yeah.
the spook
Well,
or
and every masterful horseman I've ever worked with, if we sort of, the intangible skills of great riders are balance, feel, and timing.
Mhm.
So, what we're talking about in the exercise I described is tuning into the feel, which then gives us very precise timing.
Yes.
And timing is the hardest of those three because the rate at which horses change is literally faster than the human brain can think,
Yeah.
and about 100 times faster than we can speak.
Mhm.
So it's like 10 times faster than how fast we can think or process consciously, but hundreds, if not thousands of times faster than the speed of verbal language,
Mhm.
right? Which I think is so slow for horses that they just
Tune
kind
it
of
out. They
tune it
don't hear
out.
it. They don't hear that.
Wah, wah, wah,
We
wah, wah, wah. What was that? I
Yeah.
was off
What
somewhere
I don't know
else.
what language you're talking.
Exactly. Exactly. No, and it always cracks me up that every country I've been to, and if you're Western or dressage or a jumper, everybody has their little set of verbal cues that we expect our horse to learn. And they do learn it.
They
Like,
do. All my horses know what I'm saying some of the time,
oh, absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know. They learn some of it.
they do learn our verbal language. And actually they learn that better than we learn their language
I
most of the
agree.
time.
Yeah.
And so what I try to help riders with is here's how you learn the language of horse. And what feels woo-woo and magical and mystical and horse whispering to us is the horse going, oh, finally, you're just talking to me instead of yelling at me. Like now we can have a conversation,
Hmm.
right? But it feels so subtle to us that it cracks me up when I see these books or stuff on the magical, mystical properties of horses. And I go, some of them are like, they're just like people. They all have personalities. They all have their own agenda. I go, there is magical, mystical ways of communicating with our horses, but to the horse, I don't think it feels magical or mystical. It's just normal.
Yeah. And yeah. And they love it when you get it.
Oh man, do they love
Do
it.
they love, I mean, my
Yeah.
horses seek my attention. I
Well,
want to go first. I want to
I
have a conversation first.
I think when you're struggling to speak a second language and you go to that country, but then you run into somebody who speaks your language, it's like such a relief
Yeah.
because you're not struggling to communicate anymore when you speak the same language, right?
Or maybe it's a fear of right and wrong. Or I know giving up for the human, giving up that control, and being just present and passive. That's a big leap for some people.
Yeah, well, and I think from our very first writing lesson ever, all of us were taught here's how you get on, here's how you make them go forward, here's how you make them stop, here's how you turn left and right. And from there, we just refine and advance those four basic directives. And very rarely are we in our normal course of riding instruction or training our horses, are we ever encouraged to shut up and listen?
Mhm.
It's just not part of our normal training. But when we do shut up and listen, or we put effort into speaking the language that the horse understands, which is very subtle to us, horses open up to us a lot. And that is where the magic happens, I think, between us and our horses. That intimate conversation. It's like when I ride my horses by myself, I'm engrossed
Yeah,
in the conversation as if I were having a cup of coffee with my best friend.
right.
And I don't always know where the conversation's going to go, but it's going to be interesting. I'm going to listen. I'm going to suggest something or say something and then listen some more.
And they may have a better idea than we do.
Oh, oh yeah, many times.
And to respect that, that, oh, okay, well, I'll try that to,
Yeah.
to be that open to a possibility.
And I
I mean,
think because we're brought up through the ranks, only ever thinking direct, direct, direct. Our role is the leader. Our role is the higher intelligence. Our role is the dominant one. And it's like we look at aids as sort of the response to the aid needs to be either a condition response or a submission.
true.
And so we don't know what to do when our horse flips us the finger.
Yeah,
It's like, but they all flip us the finger. It's like they just do.
yeah.
And then that's where the struggle begins.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
sometimes if we listen to them, we might find out why they're flipping us the bird.
yeah. My horses pretty much right when I get the warm up, I'll call it, is pretty much I'm letting them figure things out. And it could be 15, 20, 30 minutes until all of a sudden they're like, "Okay, I think I've worked everything out. I'm ready. I'm ready to listen now."
Yeah, and in part of that warm up, I'm never passive while I'm allowing the horse to sort
Right.
of mooch around and choose direction, adjust speed. I'm not passively waiting. I am always actively trying to get in perfect synchronization with
Hmm.
the movement, with the very middle of the movement if I'm in the saddle, which is like the point of balance, or if I'm on the ground, I can pick any random body part and synchronize my body part with that body part perfectly. And so I'm finding how can we get on the same channel?
Hmm. How
How
can we
can
get connected? Yeah.
how can I synchronize my vibration, frequency, energy, right? And Tesla said that's all there is.
Right.
Everything is vibration, frequency, and energy, or energy, frequency, and vibration. I forget the quote. But, physicists go, that's pretty much everything in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
So when I strive to really find that synchronization or harmonize with whatever energy the horse is offering or in the same frequency, matching tones.
Hmm.
It's like then everything I do once I'm there in perfect synchronization, everything is easier
Everything's easy.
because I can whisper.
Yeah. And it's the water's calm, the movement's smooth. Yeah.
And
That's what
even
I'm
if it,
always looking for.
yeah, even if it's not smooth yet and there's a lot of chaos, there's a quiet place in the middle of the storm.
Hmm.
So it's like that space you're talking about, right before a physical touch. There's a little quiet stillness in there where
Hmm.
information is exchanged.
Yeah.
And for horses, between two horses, that can be 100 feet. Between a human and a horse, maybe 3 feet max. We're not that sensitive. We're not as sensitive as horses. But as we tune into the exact, precise, and maybe ever changing speed,
Good point.
right?
Hmm.
Or stay in the middle of the exact, precise direction, even if we're not steering, right? So those forces of motion are not always in the middle of the horse's body or the middle of the saddle. The forces of motion, which are just as tangible as the physical body, can be a little bit outside of the kind of perimeters of the skin, right? And
Yeah.
that's where in the forces of motion is where we can find that frequency
Hmm.
or find that exact synchronization,
I
which
think
is,
that's what I'm always looking for. Yeah.
yeah, and it's
Where
how
is
horses
it?
communicate. So if you look at a herd of horses, no horse is sort of throwing up their hoof going this way, guys. It's like, they're not directing traffic the way we would
Right.
visually. Everything is just felt. So when one horse turns left, they're not bumping into each other. They're not like running each other over. They move like one unit.
Yeah.
And that is through the sense of touch that goes beyond the skin.
Yeah.
And it's the same like with birds, we call it murmuration, right? The whole flock of birds is each bird is sort of maintaining a consistent distance from the bird next to it and moving almost precisely at the same speed. And so the birds are not knocking into each other. It gives us this big picture of the entire flock of birds moving like one bird.
That brings up um, a really good point of connection for me because I think we just don't understand what that's all about because we think we either have to control or listen. But there is a conversation that's going on there because not only this is what was so hard in Alexander's school is being able to maintain myself and help somebody else.
Oh, yeah, that's tricky.
That is a very difficult conversation. And we see it as riders will get enmeshed and sucked into their horse, or they could be very controlling and totally ignoring what the horse is telling them. But I'm thinking of that bird flying in a flock. Not only does it have to have self-management and awareness of itself, but it has to know what the group's doing.
Yeah, and that synchronization is the communication. It
Yeah.
is the nonverbal communication. And the only time humans do it, which I find really funny, is in the military. And we have to learn how, like a
Wow.
military or a band, they call it lockstep because we have to learn to move as one unit, right?
Wow.
And so the drill sergeant's out there going left, 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 right, left to keep everybody in time, right? Because it's difficult for humans. We're much more sort of either small group oriented and we're all doing our own thing, contributing to the group, right? And so prey animals, prey species, their survival mechanism is the group moves as one unit, and that protects everybody, right? So predators are more kind of individualized,
Right, right.
right? Where they
And
might have a
they'll have tunnel vision. They're more apt to, and I see people do this all the time when they're, not keeping the peripheral in while they're doing their work. It's a very difficult task to learn.
right. So humans as a predatory species, we might have our pride like a lion, or we might have our little collective, our
Right.
tribe, right? We have tribes, but day-to-day function or survival, it only becomes collective when we're sort of at war, right?
Mhm.
So the military learns to move as one unit, or a marching band learns to move as
Right.
one unit, right? But other than that, we don't really get it. It's not that natural to
But
us.
that's really cool, because bringing that up and comparing it, because that's what we're trying, the exercise of you having the human walk next to their horse, that's what you're trying to teach them, is to get in sync, to
Absolutely.
find the sync and not control it,
And
but
that's
to
what I,
find it.
yeah, just find it, just
Just find
follow.
it. And it may be, I know for a lot of people in Alexander training, it can be a scary place to let go of control.
Yeah.
That's a big deal for a lot of riders.
But you know what's so funny about that exercise is very rapidly people are like, wow, this is hard. There's a
Yeah.
gazillion little micro adjustments, even at
Yes.
the walk. There's just all these micro adjustments going on constantly. And what I find is it's even at the walk, the horse's actual frequency of direction and speed, it changes so fast that the human brain shuts off and
Mhm.
has to feel it. And it brings people, like we don't have a moment to think about a past bad experience or the future. We have to stay incredibly present. And a
I
lot
think
of,
that's my attraction to it.
yeah, people will describe it like, oh my God, that felt like meditation. That was
Yeah, it
mentally
is meditative. You
so
can't you
intense.
I like it called meditative. It's very much so.
Yeah, to stay that present. And what's different than meditation is we're in motion.
Mhm.
We're in motion. But that is how we learn to speak horse. If we
Mhm.
can't do that, we never find what I love to call the conversational tone of of horses.
Yeah.
When we can do that, what's so interesting is the horses are like, "Hey, you're speaking my language. I can listen to you. I like this."
Yeah. Instead of
Right?
being dead-sided anymore.
Right. Well, and in the predator species, there's always a sort of hierarchy in even a
Good point.
tribe, right?
Yeah,
There's
good
a
point.
hierarchy to the order, and we try to impose that on horse herds. And it's not entirely untrue that somebody is leading the way in the horse herd,
Right.
and somebody is like, bringing up the back end. But it's more interchangeable in a prey species than it is in a predator species.
Yeah,
So
I
like
agree.
in a herd of horses, sort of the trusted leader is the one who keeps leading the herd to safety, and that's how they earn the position. But in motion, that leadership is sort of interchangeable between members,
Mhm.
which is very hard for us to understand.
Yes.
But it's like that's why a school of fish can move as one unit. A flock of birds can move as one unit. A herd of horses can move as one unit without bumping into each other and colliding. It's like that that where are we going question can be answered by many members, not just one.
Hmm.
And so that's what we're tapping into with the horse. When we follow, we suddenly become part of the herd from the
Yeah.
horse's perspective. And so we're in, we're speaking the same language, we're acting like a horse.
Hmm.
And the horse goes, you might be more interesting than most other humans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I won't have to discharge you.
I or ignore you
Or ignore you.
or just hurry up and get it over with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like I'll say to people after that exercise, once they nail it, I'm like, welcome to horse whispering.
Yeah.
It's not mythical, it's real. And that's what you're describing, these
Hmm.
beautiful riders that look integrated with the horse. That's
Yeah.
not something you can just do through the right position or the right aids. That beautiful sort of Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers
Hmm.
effect of a rider and a horse moving in perfect harmony has to be done through frequency and energy.
Hmm.
It can't just be I'm stuck to the middle of the saddle because I put glue on my pants. It's like it's not going to happen.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So, and I do find it's exactly like what you're describing with the Alexander technique, but I go the difference between hands-on and the Alexander technique, exchanging of information, horses can do that at a much greater distance.
Hmm.
Any,
I've seen it even in group sessions with, when you this is the same thing when you get into a room with other Alexander teachers. It's just so refreshing.
yeah.
You feel like you don't have to hold the world up anymore.
Well, because you all speak the same
Mm,
language.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's like it's why horse people love talking about horses.
Hmm.
We all share similar experiences and learn the same language. Yeah, I think that's kind of enough, don't you,
Yeah.
for today?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you to all the new subscribers on YouTube. We hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're pushing up on episode 100. We'll
Oh
have to
my
do,
gosh.
I know, we're going to have to do something special for that
Oh boy.
episode. I have no idea what to do. But thanks again for,
Somebody told me once, they say you look so different when you're on your podcast compared to what you'd look like at the barn. Maybe we should dress up in our in our barn clothes and
I
nobody
know.
will recognize us.
Yeah, if I don't have a hat on and my
Yeah,
hair up in a
hat and
bun, people
sunglasses.
don't know.
Nobody knows who I
No. Yep, exactly. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode and we look forward to seeing you on the next Force Geeks podcast.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.